women were the soldiers' lifeline. German troops were offered these beguiling colour postcards to reassure loved ones that they were comfortable, happy and safe. But news from the front was rarely so cosy. A German factory worker, learning that her husband had been killed, wrote to her boss to resign.
My beloved husband worked here for years, and I did the same work with his tools, and I was proud that while he was fighting at the front, I could represent him here. It was not always pleasant in the factory, but my husband's letters gave me courage. And so, until his death, the job was sacrosanct to me. That's why I can't do it anymore.
More and more women in Germany, France and Britain were making munitions. Many men were contemptuous of women's abilities to do their jobs, and fearful that if they managed it, the women might not clear off after the war. Jeannie Riley wrote to her husband at the front about her new job.
We were told that the amount of work we do in 3 weeks would have taken the men 3 years. And Jamie, the men are getting quite mad at us. One woman I work with, well, she lost her finger in the machine in the works. But she's a tough one. When she came back from the Western Infirmary, she carried on like nothing had happened. I have to get up at 4:30 every morning. So I'll have you up at the same time when you come home, if God spares you.
Jeannie's husband, Jamie, did come safely home. The most important battle Jeannie Riley and her colleagues were working towards in 1916 was the Somme. It's now a byword for wholesale suffering and slaughter, but its architect, General Sir Henry Rawlinson, conceived it as an offensive with limited objectives, more dependent on guns than manpower.
With plenty of guns and ammunition, we ought to be able to avoid the heavy losses which the infantry have always suffered on previous occasions.
The French were due to play the lead role, but with Verdun dragging on, the British bore the brunt. And there was intense political pressure to deliver a victory. General Sir Douglas Haig was the British Army's commander-in-chief. He turned Rawlinson's plan into a major offensive. When the British guns opened up on the Somme on the 24th of June 1916, the windows rattled in London 160 miles away. But after 7 days of bombardment, the British artillery had neither silenced the German guns nor destroyed their defences. A sergeant of the Tyneside Irish went over the top on the 1st of July, with lines of men on either side of him.
I heard the patter-patter of machine guns in the distance. By the time I'd gone another 10 yards, there seemed to be only a few men left around me. By the time I'd gone another 20 yards, I seemed to be on my own. Then I was hit myself.
Farmers around the Somme still gather a harvest of iron for the French army to collect and defuse. In this war, what happened in the factory directly affected the outcome on the battlefield. 30% of British shells fired on the Somme were duds, a drastic failure of quality control. But the key factor was that there weren't enough heavy guns, and British artillery wasn't much good. On that terrible first day, it became clear that the French knew what they were doing, and the British did not.
The French artillery, in their attacks, did not shoot the ground to bits before they moved over it. A short, intense bombardment, followed by a rush of men, gave them the position clean and intact. We would shoot our ground into a quagmire and then send troops slowly forward over it and expect them to provide their own cover from the enemy's retaliation.
On the 1st of July, the French gained all their objectives at a cost of a few thousand men. Britain achieved virtually nothing, with casualties of 57,470. It was the heaviest loss suffered in a single day by the British Army in its entire history. There had been a host of lessons for both sides since 1914, and the British became avid learners. How to lay down shell fire over the heads of advancing men. How to locate enemy guns using flash spotting, sound ranging, and trigonometry. And how to knock them out. Better shells, better fuses, better guns and better gunners. While the Germans came to rely more on skilled infantrymen, often acting on their own initiative, the British concentrated on fighting a technical war. It was all too late for the Somme. Haig must bear the responsibility for not stopping the slaughter when the breakthrough failed. The battle petered out in November 1916, with around 500,000 casualties on each side. Cambrai in northern France. On the 20th of November 1917, the site of the first major use of tanks in the world. Here, the British Army would put what they had learnt into practice. Britain's invention of the tank cracked a key First World War problem: how to combine firepower and movement. Tanks needed dry, hard ground. They got it at Cambrai. The attack was led by a general from the front.
A lithe figure strode up, pipe aglow, ash stick under his arm. Unexpected, it was General Ellis. "I'm going over in this tank," he announced, tapping Hilda. I swung the door open, and he squeezed through inside.
The artillery now knew not to chew up the ground ahead. A short, sharp bombardment, and then over 300 tanks rolled into the first light.
Just before 6:30 a.m. the barrage commenced, and we started off. Our first bump came fairly soon. We climbed a bank, crashed through a hedge, and came down heavily on the other side. We were thrown about like so many peanuts, and we had to clutch on to whatever we could.
The tanks, looking like giant toads, became visible against the skyline. Some of the leading tanks carried huge bundles of tightly bound brushwood, which they dropped into the wide German trenches, then crossed over them. It was broad daylight as we crossed no man's land and the German front line. I saw very few wounded coming back and a few German prisoners. The enemy wire had been dragged about like old curtains. The tanks appeared to have busted through.
The tanks, still experimental, were part of one of the most sophisticated, innovative plans of the war. The aim was to break through the German lines with minimal loss of life. The artillery would use their new skills and technology to locate and target the German batteries before the battle. The tanks would punch a hole in the German lines, with the infantry tucked up close for mutual protection, while the cavalry pushed through. Secrecy was crucial. Screens were erected to hide movements. Telltale tracks were covered with mud.
The question ever uppermost in all our minds was, does the Hun suspect anything? It was most exciting.
About 9 a.m., retreating infantrymen gave us an account of swarms of tanks, so many that it was absolutely impossible to stop them.
A little later, the tank monsters came creeping to the ridge south of the village. Not one of us had seen such a beast before.
Then, a dramatic indication that real progress had been made.
For the first time, we saw the magnificent spectacle of our field artillery limbering up and going forward. First at a trot, then at a gallop, battery after battery, to take up new positions on the captured German front line.
The Germans were caught on the hop, then pushed back 5 miles, a greater Allied advance than anything achieved on the Somme or in Flanders.
It was a long, hard day, but the sight of all the ground that had been taken with so little bloodshed was a real tonic. Troops seemed very pleased with our tanks, so pleased we had many drinks with them. It's astonishing how much whiskey the British Army carries into battle.
On the 21st of November, church bells rang out across Britain, just as they had done in Germany for Verdun. And again, the celebrations were a little hasty. The British had not achieved all their objectives. Some villages near Cambrai remained in German hands, including Flesquières. The Highlanders in this sector had been ordered to keep well away from the newfangled tanks, so they couldn't help them by knocking out machine gun nests and artillery. And lurking near Flesquières was one of the few German batteries trained against tanks.
A tank emerged from the village. Distance, 275 meters. Fire! Damn, too far. Fire! Very close. Aim a little to the right. Fire! Hit! A hit! Oh, Lord. A column of fire was bursting out of the monster. 2 of our men ran to the tank, and when they returned, they described the half-burned bodies of the crew.
Inside the tanks, the crews wrestled with the world's latest technology, under fire.
Just at this critical moment, the autovac supplying petrol to the engine failed. The engine spluttered and stopped. We were now a stationary target. In the sudden silence, we could hear the thud, thud of falling shells, and metal and earth striking the sides of the tank. The atmosphere in the tank was foul. With tense faces, the crew watched the imperturbable second driver as he coolly and methodically put the autovac right, ignoring all the proffered advice to give it a good hard knock.